What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's DH Thorne here. Figured I'd go outside and shoot a little bit of video and say hello and what's up. Test out my new lapel mic that I got here, see if it sounds good during these kinds of events. Anyway, so here we are. It's something like 20 some odd days into the the coronavirus apocalypse. I'm sitting here in my backyard just kind of hanging out and thinking about things and, contemplating what to do moving forward. I'm not going to lie, guys, this has definitely put a damper on some of my plans, some of the things that I had planned to do. Financially, it sucks. I mean, people understandably can't afford to purchase books right now and things like that. So I had just signed a deal with Amazon not too long ago that I would agree not to adjust my prices for a period of, 6 months prior to whatever their little promotion's going to be, and they're not even guaranteed that my book's going to be selected to be front page for a little while. So it kind of sucks because right now I'd actually like to reduce the prices of my books a little bit, especially the Kindle stuff, to help you guys, to make it a little bit more reasonable if you guys want to purchase things during this crunch. I mean, it would help me out a lot. It would help you guys out a little bit, those of you who want to learn the basics. Those of you who want to use my book, Become the Maelstrom. But, it is what it is. And luckily I have savings, as I mentioned in my last video. So I'm not too worried about everything. It's just mostly a matter of convenience for me and what's going to happen going forward. There's a lot of things changing, as I said in my last video. It's very important. And I think all of us are going to be adjusting. And one of the things that I want to maybe do a few videos on, maybe today will be the first one a little bit, is about doing minimalist ritual. And that's very important in magic. And, as much as I'm one of those mages, one of those sorcerers who does talk about, how it's not wrong or bad to use tools. I think tools are very useful things. I think that without tools, you can be robbing yourself sometimes of a little added energy, a little added, the floor show is important, you know what I mean? The floor show is a big part of this. It's not the whole thing. You should be able to do magic naked in an empty room, of course. But the more things you can holistically include into your practice, the better it tends to be. But a lot of times for a lot of us, that boils down to buying stuff off the internet. Buying XYZ to use. And, moving forward, things like buying candles and incense is going to get a little difficult for a little while. I have quite a stockpile of that stuff just because I just do. But at some point, even I'll run out of things. And if things aren't back on the table, if they're not back on the shelves, if Amazon continues doing what it's doing, it's going to be difficult for me to legitimately stock up on things that I need reasonably quickly. It takes about a month now to get non-essential items. I ordered, actually it's kind of obnoxious. I ordered a shaving foil for, to keep my man-do in check there. And it's a shaving foil, and it's going to take until, I think they said the end of April before I get it, at the soonest. It was like April 29th to May 5th or something. So, which they said wouldn't happen. They said health and beauty wouldn't, but whatever, I guess that doesn't count. So yeah, there's definitely some problems. Amazon's not shipping out my books. As far as I can tell, they stopped a few days ago. I haven't had a single paperback go out. I'm sure there's exceptions. I'm sure depending upon where you are, there won't be any problems. But, there's always going to be issues, for that stuff when things like this happen. And you need, as someone who's practicing magic, to be able to still function magically, even if you can't access everything you need. Now, the good news is, no matter where you are in the world right now, you're either entering in the spring or the fall. So that means the weather's actually perfect pretty much no matter where you are right now for outdoor ritual work. And that's something that I like to do occasionally, of course. I have my little fire pit here that hasn't seen much use this winter over the fall. It's kind of in disrepair. I'm going to clean that out probably in the next couple days. Oops, sorry about that. I should get one of those little selfie sticks, but it's probably too late right now. I hate using those things. It just looks so lame, but I think for these kind of videos, maybe I'll get one. And I don't feel like walking around with a tripod everywhere I go. If I want to do a video like this, so we'll see. Besides, I'm just in my backyard. I guess a tripod wouldn't be so bad. But doing minimalist ritual is going to be, for some people, especially if you're hit with economic hard times right now, like I think a lot of us are going to be coming up, learning how to do minimalist ritual is going to be important. Learning how to use the basics, and you'll find that a lot of the old, grimoires will use things that maybe were found in nature a lot. You'll find a lot of that, especially, it's always been a thing, like in Wicca and all these other different things people will tell you. Things you find on your own travels have a lot of power. I think this is one reason why maybe the last couple of weeks a lot of primal traditions have been getting popular. Like my friend Carrie's been doing a lot of primal work, and I'm not as familiar with that current as she is, but my intuition tells me that there's a lot of, you use things that you collect in the environment and things like that. It's not about this highly processed magical formula. It's a little bit different. So connecting with natural energies, nature, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's going to be important moving forward. Now, me personally, I've been working on a few books, of course, like I always am. I keep adding to my book list that I'm writing. I was writing a book that was going to be a book of symbols and invocations, and it was going to have a big selection in there about my own interpretation of the chakra system, which is still going to happen. That book is still working. I'm still working on that here and there, and I'm still releasing the videos on the chakras as I go. I have 2 more to release, which I'll probably release another one in the next day or so. It's ready. It's just finding a time to put it out when I'm not putting other stuff out is really what it is. Excuse me. Then the next Corona, but then the next book that I was working on was basically, it's a path working that I'm still doing. It's a working on exploring. I don't like using the word afterlife, but that's the easiest word to use. I would actually call it disembodied life. What comes next after our bodies are kaputnik. What is it going to be like after that? And I've been doing a lot of work with several spirits on that subject, but specifically Amdusias and Balaam and and King Balaam. Those spirits have been very, very, very helpful to me in showing me a lot. And Lilith made several appearances as well. I've seen a few interesting things. And Lilith has been drawing me back into the vampire current. And so that is a third book that I'm working on right now, is I'm going to be creating, hopefully it won't end up, my fears about doing a vampire book is that a lot of people have their own ideas of vampirism, and they're all, the thing about magic is I don't like to say they're not valid necessarily, or that mine's more valid than theirs. But mine would be my own personal experiences of these things and systems that I use to work with that current as a practice, not just, some people are a lifestyler and all this kind of stuff. And I'm not going to be touching on any of that. I'm not interested in, not that I have a problem with, but I'm not interested in things like what Father Sebastian does. And if you're not familiar with him, he was a club organizer, a club runner from the 90s. I remember when I was in the 90s as a little goth bat, little baby bat running around in my late teens and early 20s. Especially the vampire side of the goth scene, he was just kind of coming out. And in New York City, what was it? Not Bat Cave, I forget what it was. There was another goth club in there that I never really went to, but we heard it was Limelight. Maybe it was Limelight. Maybe it was a Bat Cave. I don't know. Like I said, I didn't go to many clubs in the city at the time. I was mostly out here on the island. There was a few goth clubs out here that we would go to, namely Detour. For those of you who might have gone to Long Island at the time, it was Detour, and it was at Chunky's, I guess it was the name of the actual club. But there was definitely a vampire goth scene out here, and at some point there was this movement towards creating sort of a subculture within the goth subculture. It's a niche of a niche, but they were trying to create like this I don't know, this hierarchy, this almost cliquish kind of thing. And I kind of, at first it was interesting to me, but the Luciferian in me saw saw the rumblings of cliquishness, I guess you could say. And so I kind of bowed out of that a little bit. But it was interesting for a little while because it was definitely a thing that was done. There was definitely a movement going on. People were, getting interested in legitimate occult, esoteric practices of vampirism. And they were finding out that, this is something I'll probably be putting in this book, is that vampirism isn't limited to people who are vampires, okay? You don't have to be limited to that at all. Vampirism as a condition, if you would even call it that, is mostly from my experience, it's an energetic imbalance due to, well, often it's caused by abuse, abuse by a mundane or someone who might have a vampiric tendency, and they drain someone to the point, even the shadow current does this, but anything can do this. You can be drained, or you can be damaged in your energy body due to abuse, due to trauma, due to all kinds of things. Past life trauma, can cause this energy body abuse, damage that can cause an imbalance to where you need to find sources of either energy to, I use the word ingest, but you're not really eating anything, but to ingest into your own energy body, or to, somebody must have just got corona. I'll wait for that to pass a little bit. That might be pretty loud. Yes, in addition to living right next to a train track and a school, I live about a block away from a major fire department too, so it's noisy as fuck here sometimes. But it's actually pretty quiet today, which is kind of nice. I think, going back to what I originally was talking about the other day, about how nice it is that this virus has sent everybody scurrying to ground, basically, is you see a lot of people hanging out outside. It's actually a nice thing. I'm actually we're driving around, and I made a post on Facebook today joking about how we're coughing at people as we're driving by, and it's mostly just all in good fun. But I'm actually happy to see people walking around. This is really good for, I think a lot of people finally have real time off for the first time in their lives since they were a kid. There's a lot of people who are getting to enjoy their spring for the first time since they were kids. Well, anyway, back to the subject of the vampirism thing. So I think there's people, like I said, they've have this thing they need to ingest. They need to take in the energy of other people or their environment or objects. Vampirism isn't limited to just other living things. You can vampirize an object as well. This is basic energy work 101. If you understand how to do magic using energy work, if you look in my book, Become the Maelstrom, I talk about energy work quite a bit, because it's important. Even on a very basic level, if you understand it a little bit, if you can do even just, psi balls, chi balls, whatever you want to call it, and learn how to charge them with certain intentions, learn how to drain that into yourself, how to inhale it into yourself, you can do a lot energetically, and it's very useful. And it's a practice that I try to, there's a little scurrying critter back there. It's a practice that I try to utilize when possible. Okay, so you don't have to be a vampire to utilize energy work of a vampiric nature. So what makes something vampiric versus just energy work? Generally speaking, vampirism, one thing I want to say before I say that, I was getting to the point, forgive me, is when I'm saying it's not just ingesting, but it's also resonance. It's also, if you have an imbalance in your energy system because of your vampiric nature, from time to time you need to balance that by sometimes symbiotically. Yeah, see what I mean, guys? This is what I'm talking about. This is why it's difficult to shoot video out here. You need to sometimes commune with people and spirits to balance your energy flow, because it's not just about feeding on people. That's just one level of it. That's sometimes the most basic level. People who aren't very experienced. When you're more advanced, you don't really feed on people. It's more of a symbiotic thing, because you actually get more out of it, and it takes less effort. It's less traumatic and stressful for both of you. Now, why do I say that? Well, because when people are using a more vampiric, parasitic method, they have to cause stress, drama, chaos, emotional disruption. They have to cause pain, harm, physical or otherwise, to get the energy that they need almost always. Because part of that vampiric exchange, part of that feeding process is to, it's like this all the time sometimes, guys, I apologize. Part of that process is to offload your negative energy that you're not dealing with properly onto someone else. That's part of what vampirizing means. That's not often talked about, because, a lot of the times in the vampiric subculture, there's a feel-good attitude about it, where it's got to always be positive. There's nothing negative about it. It's not a sickness. It's all good. It's all just it's just fun. It's just role play. We're all being safe. But what people don't realize is how deeply embedded the shadow current is into vampirism as well. A lot of the times, people who are suffering from what would be called vampirism in a esoteric, mystical, metaphysical sense, these are people who have a very deeply disturbing shadow side that is caused by abuse, it's caused by harm, it's caused by flaw that, and when I say flaw, I don't mean it's actually a flaw, I mean it's a self-perceived flaw that causes people to have energy imbalances in their life, and they don't learn how to deal with these things. And so the way that they heal themselves, the way that they treat it, is essentially to feed on others and then exchange that with negative energy. It becomes like a codependence issue, especially with psi vampirism more than any other variant. Psychic vampires are a dime a dozen. I mean, if you walk down the street, you'll run into 3 and you don't even realize it, because psychic vampirism is very subtle and it's very, it's physically harmless mostly. And it's really, I think, at the core of all vampirism is psychic vampirism, honestly. I don't really think exchanging bodily fluids in the sense does anything. I think blood is a conduit for life energy, for living energy. And when people do participate in blood play, that's what they're doing, is they're using that as it's almost like if you ever build a computer, when you put your CPU in and you put the heat sink on the CPU, you have to put thermal paste on it, and that thermal paste is a conduit. It's a compound which increases the exchange between the I'm getting really nerdy, between the CPU and the heat unit, and it is basically it's a really good conductor. There we go. So blood is an excellent conductor of psychic energy, and it is non-local. That is to say, if you take a sample of someone's blood, living blood, and you use it while it's still alive in particular, but even when it's not, even when it's had time to dry and die, it retains a psychic connection to the individual that you're trying to work with. When I say work with, in this case, I mean to feed upon or or whatever. So when you participate in blood play, whether that's ingestion or just touching, there's an energetic exchange, and it's very powerful for some people. Very often, it's nothing like the movies. When you do this, the victim, quote unquote, I shouldn't even use that word really, but that's the word most people would associate. The victim doesn't necessarily feel anything because it's subtle. It's all subtle. It's going to take time. Continued practice you can actually see people when it's not done safely and properly. People who are being fed upon, they do start to exhibit psychic problems, and you can see it in their behavior more than anything. And that behavior over enough time will drain someone. This is why a lot of the myths of the vampire involve someone being fed upon night after night after night, getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And this is because this is all metaphorical. You have to understand that most things in the occult and supernatural should not be taken literally. Just like if you were still a Christian, or if you ever were a Christian, they would often tell you not to take the Bible too literally, unless you were perhaps certain forms of Protestant. They would tell you treat things more metaphorical and allegorical, and it's more useful that way. And in the same sense, a lot of things in the occult are that way. Again, that doesn't mean supernatural weird things don't happen. I don't ever want to, I always have to preface these things and make those exceptions. But it doesn't mean that supernatural and weird things don't happen. It just means more often than not, it's going to have a subtle effect on people. It's going to have a very subtle influence on people's energy and their life. And you're not going to see people just like, people aren't going to suddenly be incapable of being in the daylight. Even with the height of my vampiric stage in life, when I hadn't got control of those things, and I was still practicing it because I had to, I was feeling down in the dumps and broken and energy deficient because the shadows were feeding on me constantly. Even when I was using that and inverting it and becoming a vampire in my own way, I was still out in the daylight. It wasn't my preference. I didn't feel great in the sunlight. It wasn't that great for me, but I've actually gotten to the point now where I need sunlight on occasion. I need to go out and get that vitamin D shot basically from the sun on my skin. Otherwise I feel ill. But you can tell I'm pretty pale and pasty, right? So it's just how I am. Anyway, what I'm getting at, though, is again, this feeding process isn't, there's different kinds of it. And there is the symbiotic version in which the give and take of the vampire and their, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, their source. I'll have to think of a good name that's doesn't have too much implication. I don't like using victim because victim is only what happens in the other version. But when you have a symbiotic relationship with someone, there's an exchange of something. And sometimes that exchange isn't always equal. Sometimes the person practicing the vampiric art is taking in more than they're receiving. But there's still an exchange going on that the other person finds value. Sometimes it's just a matter of someone feels nurturing towards the vampire and they don't mind a little bit of a gift of their energy from time to time if it makes them happy and healthy. And in exchange, the vampire gives them love and support that helps them, and they don't notice a big difference in their life. This is part of that vampire lifestyle that happens with healthy people anyway. But then you have the more parasitic kind, and this is usually done by people who don't have a very mature, strong, evolved, intentional form of vampirism going for them. They don't know what they are, and they just have like emotional problems. They're just psychotic. They're narcissistic. They just have these issues where they just abuse people because that's what they feed on. They feed on the pain and the pleasure of the events of abusing people and things. And it's also very, again, this is, when I say that vampirism and the shadow current are like embedded in each other, I honestly believe that vampirism is a product of the shadow current more than anything, and people just don't know it because it's difficult to see, because people, again, Hollywood, pop culture, all those things have ruined a valid esoteric mystical perspective and turned it into something that is hokey and supernatural and goofy, and you got to have fangs and all this. That's a lot of this stuff is superstition from various cultures. It's a monster that they had that was superstition. But again, all superstition is just it's ignorant mysticism. It's ignorant metaphysics. It's metaphysics dumbed down to the point of being useless. It's the ideas of metaphysics turned into superstitious belief is what it is. And this is where you have to try to find yourself. This is why I consider myself like a rational spiritualist, a rational mage, a rational mystic, is because I don't believe in the superstitious very much. That's not to say that I don't use superstition. That's not to say I don't clothe myself in it. That's not to say that I don't use the imagery of it, because it has power. Superstition is not without power. It is not without use. It is just, as a practitioner, you should not be subjected. You should not be subject to that superstition. Superstition is a tool, not a thing that contains you. And this is a thing that I see throughout every spiritual culture, not just the left-hand path. There is this, there's a group of people who are enlightened, they're mystical, they're this, they're that, they have the basics, even if they don't know it. They are very sensible, very rational. Then you have the superstitious who just practice these things, whether it be the left-hand path, the right-hand path, Buddhism, Luciferianism, Christianity, in a very superstitious way. And the superstitious ones, they're the ones who often have the warnings and the fears and the concerns and the very mechanical worldview of what these things are. They're very much the ones who say, well, if you don't use the right color candle, the spirit will be offended. That's not to say that there aren't, currents of magic where that might be true. It's just in my experience with every current that I've played with and used and worked with, that's never been the case. That's never been the case. It's always been a case of my intention rules overall. If my intention is noble and just, if I am not dabbling in just being a goofball, if I'm taking it seriously and treating it with respect, it generally works out fine without any problems. And this is where, what I do kind of tends to blend very well with what demonolators do. And that's because I treat those spirits with reverence and respect as ancient beings that are here to guide us and help us. I don't worship them in the sense that I bow down to them and follow them as if they're gods, although I do use the word gods for them. But I'm touching a lot of bases here because this is important. There are spirits of vampirism. There are these things that are involved. And if you get really superstitious about things, I think it clouds the practice, although it can make it more fun sometimes, I'm not going to lie. Playing the part of a vampire is fun. It's a fun role play. I'm not going to deny it, but it's not necessary. It's really not. I do it for fun, and I don't give a shit if people don't think it's cool. It's just how I am. It's how I roll. It's how I live my life. It's what gives me strength, power, and comfort. But it's not because I think it's necessary. It's not because I think acting like a vampire and having dark clothes and walking around looking like I could bite you and kill you and all this stuff is in any way important to the current. You could be just an average person wearing your baseball cap and your khakis, going to your day job and just be dark and vampiric as fuck on the inside, and that's just what you are. But again, vampirism doesn't have to be dark. This is all part of the image, right? This is part of the image, and without that image, vampirism becomes boring pretty quickly. When you understand that vampirism is basically just a form of energy work and working with energy without the trappings, it becomes kind of like, well, I knew that. I can do that with my regular magical practices. What's the difference? And that's kind of my point. You don't have to be a vampire to practice to do vampiric practices, to literally be vampiric. You don't have to be, or vampiric, however you prefer to say it. You don't have to be suffering from an energy imbalance in which you need to participate in vampiric activities to feel balanced. And put away the pop culture if you really want to understand what vampirism means. It is not this, you're not feeding off of people like you're a predator. Only people who have these deep-seated problems, who don't know how to do energy work, who haven't found balance, who haven't healed, usually people who aren't aware of themselves, excuse me, I got hiccups, people who aren't aware of their vampiric nature. Namely, again, narcissists, people like that have these problems in their psychology. They practice vampirism subconsciously. They feed upon you by causing you stress and pain and chaos in your life, and they corrupt your energy, and they drain from you. I have people in my own life who, even as a high-practicing sorcerer, they are blood relatives and they have power over me in a vampiric nature, because until they're dead, I have to, unless I want to betray family members or something, I have to put up with certain things. And they have that power. They can, with a phone call, in a depressive mood, I have to put up ward after ward after ward and shield after shield. Otherwise, they can suck it right out of me and make me feel drained, and I have to then deal with that. I either have to do ritual, or I have to do parasitic vampiric practices or symbiotic ones to adjust. And vampirism can be done, you can do it with your environment, with different things. There's different styles, different levels. And my book will be about all of this when it is finished. And I'm working on 3 books right now, so I don't know which one's going to end up being done first. I think right now, because people are scared of corona, I think a book about death and the afterlife would probably be something people would be interested in. So from a business perspective, that's probably the best book to release next, but I'm not into it right now. I've kind of concluded a few stages of the path working I've been doing, visiting the various places in the afterworld that I've been interested in, and I have a lot more to do. I'm sort of emulating, I don't want to say I'm emulating, but I was inspired a little bit by the concept of Dante's Inferno, and I wanted to do my own infernal exploration instead of coming at it from a Christian perspective, and see what these realms are really like. Obviously, not the way he showed them. We're not descending into different circles of hell or anything, but and want to see what they're like from the perspective of a non-Christian. And I found some very interesting things. At some point, that will be coming. And if someone beats me to it and releases a book about this first, well, fuck you for stealing my idea. But I'm sure I'm stealing somebody's idea. I recently found out that some of my rituals that I've created, there was rituals not unlike them in other people's practices before, which is fine. I mean, that's the thing about magic and doing these things for real. When you're doing them intuitively and naturally, great minds will think alike and come up with similar ideas, I guess. So it's just my brand of things. That's what you're interested in and what you're looking for. My personal opinion about them, because they're lived in. They're very much lived in. I'm not getting this from books or anything. This is my practices that I've always had, or things that I've deeply thought about and done myself, not things that I've learned from someone else necessarily, with exceptions, obviously. So yeah, those are the 3 books I'm working on. The vampiric one is what I'm into right now, so that's probably the one I'm going to do the most work on. It's actually going to be the shorter. I'm probably going to make that, instead of calling it a book, I'm going to call it a handbook. I'm aiming for something shorter, 30 to 100 pages, something like that, mostly filled with I don't want to get into like flowery stuff. I'm not trying to get into prose. I want to get into methods and things like that. I'm not looking to explain the pop culture and all that stuff. I'm not trying to, like with Shadownomicon, I wanted to show you where they come from as much as how to work with them. Well, this is going to be more mechanical in nature, so that will probably be interesting to some people. I'm sorry if I'm shaking a lot. I'm kind of holding the camera up with one hand, like holding it stretched out. I really got to get one of those, I think I will. I'll put it on order. It'll take a month to get here. I'll get one of those selfie sticks. Ooh, I'm going to have a selfie stick, guys. It's going to be a selfie. Okay. In all seriousness, so anyway, this has been, 30 minutes went by. I can't shut up, can I? So this has been about a 30-minute video, and I appreciate you guys a lot, as always. Thank you for keeping with me during this adventure. And we recently hit 2,000 subs, and I'm still feeling pretty cool about that. And, it's nice to be out on this beautiful spring day. Get yourself outside, but stay protected. If you go outside, make sure that you are, you're by yourself. Don't mingle too much, you know, only with your immediate family or whatever. Take your precautions, wear your masks, you know, clean your hands, don't touch your face, all that good stuff that people have been telling you. Listen to what they're telling you, and do your magical spiritual protection. And, you know, if you want to help a brother out who's going to be struggling because he's self-employed, check in my books in the description, check out my Patreon, and sign up for whatever or buy whatever you can. And send me a message on Facebook. Ask me a question. Give me a like, a comment, a subscribe, whatever you want to do. And I'll be doing these videos as long as you guys will be watching them. All right, guys. Take care.